My brother humiliated me at my mother's 70th birthday party, announcing to everyone that I wasn't welcome and forcing me to foot a $4,200 bill for a party I was kicked out of. But what he didn't know was that he had just discovered something absolutely devastating about what he was doing to our mother behind closed doors. But before you tell him, subscribe to our channel now so you don't miss any of the incredible stories of justice and revenge we share here. Have you subscribed yet? Thank you for being part of our community. Now, let's start from the beginning. My name is Carol Martinez, and for 35 years, I've lived in the shadow of my brother's carefully constructed perfection. As a registered nurse at Phoenix General Hospital, I've learned to read people beneath their facades. But somehow I'd missed the cracks in Kevin's golden exterior until it was almost too late. Kevin was everything our parents had dreamed of. The successful insurance salesman with his expensive BMW, designer suits, and that confident charm that had opened every door since childhood. But success, I would learn, can be as much of a prison as failure, especially when it's built on credit cards and borrowed time. 3 months before Mom's birthday party, I'd overheard a heated phone conversation Kevin was having in Mom's driveway, something about final notice and wage garnishment. When he saw me approaching, he'd switched to his business voice so smoothly, I almost convinced myself I'd imagined the panic in his tone. Looking back, that was the moment I should have started asking questions, but Kevin had trained our entire family to believe that questioning him was the same as doubting his perfection. The golden child doesn't make mistakes. He just encounters temporary setbacks that lesser people wouldn't understand. Mom had always been the sharpest woman I knew, the type who could balance a checkbook to the penny and remember every birthday, anniversary, and doctor's appointment for our extended family. Martha Rodriguez. Martinez was a force of nature who had immigrated from Mexico as a teenager, built a life through sheer determination, and raised 2 children while working part-time as a bookkeeper for local businesses. She had steel in her spine and fire in her eyes, never accepting excuses and never backing down from what she believed was right. That's why the changes I'd been noticing over the past year were so jarring. The way she'd pause mid-sentence searching for words that had always come easily. The subtle confusion when familiar faces appeared at family gatherings. The tremor in her hands that she tried to hide by keeping them busy with cooking or cleaning. Kevin insisted these were just normal signs of aging, that I was being dramatic because of my medical training making me see problems everywhere. But nurses learned to trust their instincts, and mine were screaming that something was seriously wrong with the woman who had been the anchor of our family for 7 decades. The mom I remembered would never have let Kevin take over her finances without a fight, would never have agreed to miss doctor's appointments, would never have accepted confusion as an inevitable part of getting older. The first real warning sign came 6 months before the birthday party, when Mom called me at 2 a.m. asking if I knew where Dad was. He said he was going to the store for milk, Mia, but that was hours ago. I'm worried something happened to him. The confused desperation in her voice broke my heart as I gently reminded her that Dad had died 8 years earlier. "Oh," she whispered, and I could hear her crying softly. I forgot again, didn't I? Kevin says I forget things now. The fact that she was calling me instead of Kevin at 2 a.m. told me she still trusted me more in her moments of vulnerability, but it also revealed how isolated she'd become from everyone except her golden son. When I called Kevin the next morning to discuss getting Mom evaluated, he brushed off my concerns with practiced authority. "She's fine, Carol. Just a little confused sometimes. The doctor says it's normal aging, and I should know since I'm the one taking her to appointments." But something about his tone felt rehearsed, like he'd prepared this response for exactly this conversation. I asked which doctor he'd taken her to, but Kevin deflected, saying he had everything under control and that my overthinking was just causing unnecessary stress for Mom. Kevin's financial situation began unraveling publicly 3 weeks before Mom's birthday. Though he managed to keep most of the family from noticing, I only discovered the truth because I happened to be at Mom's house when his ex-wife Amanda showed up demanding the latest child support payment. "Tell your precious Kevin that hiding behind Mommy won't work forever," Amanda spat through the screen door, her voice carrying the exhaustion of someone who'd been fighting this battle for months. The court order is for $3,200 a month, and he's 4 months behind. If I don't get a check by Friday, his wages are getting garnished. After Amanda left, Mom stood in her hallway looking bewildered, asking me who that angry woman was and why she was talking about Kevin owing money. The pieces started connecting in my mind. Kevin's recent stress, his increased presence at Mom's house, his sudden interest in managing her finances. When I gently asked Mom about Kevin helping with her money, she became agitated in a way that seemed more like fear than confusion. He says I can't handle it anymore, that I make mistakes. But sometimes I don't remember giving him permission to take money. The vulnerability in her admission made my stomach clench with a familiar protective instinct I'd developed working with elderly patients who couldn't advocate for themselves. The gambling addiction revelation came purely by accident 2 weeks before the party, when I found Kevin's truck parked outside Desert Diamond Casino at 10 p.m. on a Tuesday night. I'd been driving home from a late shift and recognized his distinctive BMW truck immediately. Kevin had always been particular about his vehicles being visible symbols of his success. Curiosity won over discretion, and I parked across the street to wait, telling myself I was being ridiculous even as I stayed glued to my seat. When Kevin finally emerged at midnight, he looked nothing like the confident man who commanded every family gathering. His shoulders were hunched, his expensive shirt was wrinkled, and he was checking his phone with the frantic energy of someone expecting bad news. The next morning, I casually mentioned seeing his truck near the casino district, expecting him to laugh and explain he'd been meeting a client for dinner. Instead, Kevin's face went white, then immediately flushed red with anger. What are you stalking me now? I was meeting a client about a large policy, if you must know. Not that it's any of your business where I go. But his defensive response confirmed what I was starting to suspect. The golden child was drowning, and he was looking for life rafts in all the wrong places. The week before Mom's birthday party, Kevin's mask slipped completely during a family phone call that accidentally included me on a conference line. I'd called Mom at the same time Kevin did, and somehow we were all connected without someone noticing initially. Mom, I need another $8,000 to cover the divorce settlement, Kevin said, his voice lacking its usual confidence. See, Amanda's threatening to take me back to court, and I can't afford another court battle. You trust me, right? I'm just borrowing against your inheritance. It'll all come back to me anyway when you get back. The casual way he discussed Mom's death while asking for money made my skin crawl, but Mom's response was even worse. I don't get it, bro. You borrowed $5,000 last week? And the week before that? Kevin's voice immediately shifted to the patronizing tone he used when he thought someone was being difficult. Mom, we talked about this. You're getting confused about money, remember? That's why I'm handling everything now. Just sign the withdrawal slip like we discussed. I hung up quietly, my hands shaking with rage and fear, finally understanding the full scope of what was happening to our mother. Kevin wasn't just stealing money, he was systematically dismantling her sense of reality, making her doubt her own memory while he drained her life savings. The night before the birthday party, I couldn't sleep, lying in my small apartment thinking about the woman who had sacrificed everything to give Kevin and me better lives than she'd had. Mom had worked double shifts as a young mother, had saved every penny for our college educations, had taught us that family meant protecting each other no matter what. The irony was devastating. Her beloved son was now the greatest threat to her safety and dignity, while I, the daughter who'd supposedly never lived up to expectations, was the only one who could protect her. I made a decision that night that would change everything. I was going to document Kevin's theft, gather evidence of his manipulation, and find a way to stop him before he destroyed Mom completely. But first, I had to survive tomorrow's birthday party, had to watch Kevin play the devoted son while I sat in silence, knowing the truth about what he was doing to our mother. As I finally drifted off to sleep, I couldn't shake the feeling that tomorrow night would be the last time I attended a family gathering as the unwanted daughter. One way or another, everything was about to change, and Kevin's perfectly constructed world was about to come crashing down around him like the house of cards it had always been. Romano's Italian restaurant buzzed with the forced cheerfulness of a family gathering built on secrets and resentment. The private dining room Kevin had reserved was decorated in Mom's favorite burgundy and gold colors, though I wondered if he actually remembered that or if it was just a lucky coincidence. 47 family members and friends filled the space. Aunts, uncles, cousins, family friends, and even some of Mom's former co-workers from the insurance office where she'd kept books for 30 years. Kevin had spared no expense, ordering premium menu items, top-shelf liquor, and elaborate floral arrangements that probably cost more than I made in a week. The irony wasn't lost on me that he was funding this display of devotion with money stolen from the guest of honor herself. I arrived wearing a simple navy dress and carrying the photo album I'd spent weeks creating for Mom, filled with 7 decades of memories I'd carefully researched and annotated. But Kevin had seated me at the furthest table from the head table, between Great Aunt Ruth, who was practically deaf, and Cousin Mike, who spent the entire evening detailing his golf handicap to anyone unfortunate enough to make eye contact. The message was clear. I was invited but not welcome, present but not important, family but not really part of the family that mattered. Mom looked beautiful in her pearl necklace and the blue dress that brought out her eyes, but I couldn't stop noticing the signs that everyone else seemed determined to ignore. She kept asking the same questions about guests she'd known for decades. Her hands trembled when she reached for her wine glass, and there were long moments when she'd stare into space with an expression of profound confusion. When Uncle Roberto told his famous story about Dad's fishing trip disaster, Mom laughed politely, but then leaned over to Aunt Carmen and whispered loudly enough for me to hear, "Who is that man? Should I know him?" Aunt Carmen quickly redirected the conversation, but not before I caught the worried glance she shared with Kevin. This wasn't normal aging. This was a woman in the early stages of dementia, and everyone was pretending not to notice because acknowledging it would mean acknowledging that Kevin might not have her best interests at heart. The most heartbreaking moment came when Mom opened my photo album and spent several minutes studying a picture of herself and Dad from their 25th anniversary. "He was so handsome," she said wistfully, then looked up at me with tears in her eyes. "Is he coming tonight? I thought he was coming tonight." The raw grief in her voice as I gently reminded her that Dad was gone made my chest tight with rage at Kevin for exploiting her vulnerability instead of protecting it. The evening's carefully orchestrated performance began falling apart during the salad course, when Mom became agitated about her purse, convinced someone had moved it from where she'd placed it on her chair. Kevin smoothly intervened, locating the purse at her feet where it had apparently fallen, but Mom insisted she would never have put it there. "I always keep my purse on my lap during dinner," she said with increasing distress. "Someone moved it. Someone went through my purse." The accusation hung in the air awkwardly until Kevin put his arm around her shoulders with theatrical gentleness. "Mom, you're just a little confused tonight. There are so many people here. It's overwhelming. No one touched your purse." But I remembered Mom's habits from decades of family dinners. She was absolutely right about always keeping her purse on her lap, and the fact that Kevin so quickly dismissed her accurate memory while attributing it to confusion revealed how systematically he'd been undermining her confidence in her own perceptions. Several relatives nodded approvingly at Kevin's patient handling of the situation, but I saw something else in their expressions. Relief that someone else was managing the uncomfortable reality of Mom's declining cognitive abilities. They were all complicit in Kevin's manipulation, not through malice but through their desperate desire to avoid confronting an uncomfortable truth. Kevin's toast began with all the warmth and charisma that had made him the family favorite since childhood. He stood confidently at the head table, his expensive suit perfectly tailored, his smile radiant as he raised his wine glass to the assembled crowd. "I want to thank everyone for coming tonight to celebrate the most amazing woman any of us will ever know," he began, his voice carrying across the room with practiced ease. "Mom, you've been the heart and soul of our family for 70 years. You taught us about sacrifice, about putting family first, about never giving up when things get tough." The room erupted in applause, and I found myself genuinely moved despite everything I knew about Kevin's true nature. Mom beamed at the praise, looking more like her old self than she had all evening, and for a moment I almost convinced myself that Kevin genuinely loved her despite what he was doing. But then his expression began to change, his eyes scanning the room before landing on me with unmistakable coldness. "Horace, of course. Not everyone here tonight truly understands what family means," he continued, his voice taking on a harder edge that made my stomach drop. "Some people only show up when it's convenient for them, when they need something, or when they feel guilty enough to make an appearance after months of absence." The room fell silent with the kind of uncomfortable quiet that descends when family drama erupts in public spaces. I felt 46 pairs of eyes turning toward me, some confused, others knowing exactly where Kevin was heading with his speech. My face burned with humiliation as I realized he was about to make me the villain in his carefully crafted narrative of family devotion. "Carol," he said, his voice now loud enough to ensure everyone could hear, "you're not welcome here. Mom doesn't want disappointments at her party. She's told me herself that your occasional visits upset her, that your constant questions about her health and finances are stressful." The lie was delivered with such conviction that I almost doubted my own memories of Mom expressing concern about Kevin's control over her life. Several relatives nodded in agreement, their expressions ranging from pity to barely concealed satisfaction that someone was finally calling out my supposed neglect. Aunt Maria looked away uncomfortably, but Uncle Roberto actually smiled and raised his glass as if toasting Kevin's courage in addressing the family embarrassment. Mom sat frozen at the head table, her eyes wide with confusion and what looked like fear, as if she wasn't quite sure what was happening but understood it was somehow her fault. The silence that followed Kevin's declaration felt eternal, broken only by the soft clink of silverware and nervous coughs from relatives who suddenly found their dinner plates fascinating. I wanted to stand up, to defend myself, to ask Kevin what gave him the right to speak for our mother when she was sitting right there capable of speaking for herself. But my voice seemed trapped somewhere deep in my chest, paralyzed by the same childhood conditioning that had always made Kevin the authority and me the problem to be solved. I kept waiting for someone, anyone, to question Kevin's right to banish me from our mother's birthday party, to point out that Mom looked confused rather than relieved by his announcement. But the silence stretched on, punctuated only by resumed conversations and the sound of laughter from the main dining room where other families were celebrating without the undercurrent of cruelty that seemed to permeate every Martinez gathering. In that moment, sitting in that beautiful restaurant surrounded by people who shared my blood but not my values, I understood with crystalline clarity that I had been alone in this family for much longer than I'd realized. Kevin had spent years positioning me as the ungrateful daughter while cementing his role as the devoted son, and tonight was simply the public culmination of a campaign I hadn't even known was being waged against me. 25 minutes later, as dessert was being served to everyone except me, the restaurant manager appeared at my table with the leather folder that would complete my humiliation. Daniel Morales was a kind-faced man in his 50s who looked genuinely uncomfortable about whatever conversation we were about to have. Excuse me, Miss Martinez," he said quietly, glancing nervously toward Kevin's table where animated conversation had resumed as if nothing had happened. "I'm terribly sorry to bother you, but there seems to be some confusion about the payment for tonight's event." My heart sank as he opened the folder to reveal a bill that made my breath catch. $4,173.89 for a party I'd been publicly uninvited from attending. The itemized charges stared back at me. Osso buco for 12 people, premium wine selections, champagne toast, elaborate dessert course, flowers, service charges, all for a celebration that Kevin had organized and apparently expected me to fund. "Your brother indicated there was some kind of family arrangement about the payment," Daniel continued, his voice barely above a whisper. "He said you'd be taking care of the bill tonight, but given what just... Well, Given the situation, I wanted to confirm with you directly. I looked across the room at Kevin, who was pointedly avoiding my gaze while regaling his table with some story that had everyone laughing, his performance as the perfect host continuing seamlessly despite having just destroyed his sister's dignity in front of the entire extended family. The cruel mathematical precision of my humiliation hit me like a physical blow. $4,273.89 represented nearly 3 weeks of my salary as a nurse. Money I'd been carefully saving for a down payment on a small house where I could finally build a life that belonged entirely to me. But more than the financial impact, the bill represented the complete power dynamic of our family. Kevin got to play the generous host while I got stuck with the consequences. Kevin got the applause while I got the invoice. Kevin got to be the beloved son while I got to be the family ATM that funded my own public rejection. My hands shook as I reached for my credit card, the same tremor I'd noticed in Mom's hands earlier that evening, and I wondered if this was how powerlessness always manifested, in the small betrayals of our own bodies when our minds couldn't process the scope of what was being done to us. "Miss Martinez," Daniel said softly, his voice filled with genuine concern. "If there's been some mistake, if you need a moment to sort this out with your family—" His kindness almost broke me, the way a stranger's sympathy can sometimes hit harder than a loved one's cruelty, because it reminds you that human decency still exists somewhere in the world, just not at your own dinner table. "No, there's no mistake," I whispered, signing the receipt with a hand that refused to stop trembling, the words tasting like ashes in my mouth. The pen felt impossibly heavy, as I added a tip that Daniel certainly deserved but that I could barely afford. Then signed my name on a receipt that felt like a surrender document in a war I hadn't known I was fighting. Daniel processed the payment with professional discretion, but I could see the confusion and disgust in his eyes as he glanced toward Kevin's table where the celebration continued without any acknowledgement of what had just transpired. As I sat there holding that receipt, listening to my family laugh and celebrate around me while I absorbed the financial and emotional cost of their evening, I made a decision that would change the trajectory of all our lives. I was done being the family scapegoat, done accepting treatment that I wouldn't tolerate from strangers, done pretending that blood relations justified emotional and financial abuse. The woman who walked out of Romano's that night was different from the one who had walked in hoping for acceptance and belonging. She was angrier, more determined, and infinitely more dangerous to anyone who underestimated her capacity for justice. As I gathered my purse and prepared to leave my own mother's birthday party, I was already planning the investigation that would expose Kevin's crimes and the confrontation that would destroy his carefully constructed image forever. I drove to Mom's house the following Tuesday with my stomach churning and my mind racing, knowing that I had less than an hour before Kevin's usual afternoon visit to gather evidence that might save our mother's life savings. The $4,273.89 receipt was still in my purse like a talisman of rage, reminding me of exactly how far Kevin was willing to go to maintain his facade while bleeding our family dry. Mom answered the door in her bathrobe at 2 p.m., which immediately triggered every alarm bell in my nursing-trained brain. She had always been impeccably dressed by 8 a.m., believing that maintaining appearances was a form of self-respect that no one could take away from you. "Oh, Carol, sweetie, I wasn't expecting you," she said, her voice carrying the kind of gentle confusion that breaks your heart, while simultaneously fueling your determination to fight for someone who can no longer fight for herself. "Kevin said you were angry about something at the party. Did I do something wrong?" The fact that she was blaming herself for Kevin's public humiliation of me revealed how thoroughly he had manipulated her perception of reality, convincing her that any family conflict must somehow be her fault. I helped her into a clean house dress while she chattered about being tired lately, about forgetting things that used to be second nature, about how grateful she was that Kevin was helping her manage everything because it had all become too complicated for her to understand. "Mom, I'm not angry at you at all," I said gently, guiding her to the kitchen table where she could rest while I made tea. "Oh, I'm concerned about you, and I want to make sure you're getting all the help you need." As the kettle heated, I casually mentioned that I'd left my phone charger in Dad's old office the last time I visited, hoping she wouldn't remember that I hadn't been to the house in over 3 months. Mom nodded absently, her attention focused on the crossword puzzle that lay half-finished on the table. The same puzzle that had been sitting there for weeks with only 3 words filled in. While she struggled to remember a 7-letter word for betrayal, I slipped into Dad's office and immediately understood why Kevin had been so determined to keep me away from the house. The normally organized space was in chaos. Bank statements scattered across the desk, medical forms stacked haphazardly on filing cabinets, and prescription bottles scattered on the windowsill like abandoned promises of better health. The first. The document I found was a withdrawal receipt for $6,000, dated just a week after the birthday party, signed in my mother's increasingly shaky handwriting, with Kevin's name listed as the recipient and family expenses, written on the memory line. Below it was another withdrawal for $4,500, then another for $3,200, all within the last 6 weeks, since I started paying more attention to Kevin's finances. The medical records I discovered next made my professional training and personal love for my mother collide in a perfect storm of rage and heartbreak. Tucked underneath a stack of unpaid bills were appointment summaries from Dr. Elizabeth Peterson, Mom's longtime physician, documenting a cognitive decline that had been accelerating for over 2 years. The mini mental state examinations showed scores dropping from 2830 2 years ago to 1930 at her last appointment 6 months earlier, a decline that indicated moderate cognitive impairment requiring immediate intervention and support. Dr. Peterson's notes were detailed and alarming. Patient shows significant short-term memory loss, difficulty with complex tasks, occasional disorientation to time and place. Recommend immediate initiation of Aricept 10 mg daily, Namenda 20 mg daily, and monthly monitoring appointments. Family support crucial for medication compliance and safety monitoring. But when I checked Mom's medicine cabinet, I found both prescriptions unopened, still in their original pharmacy bags with dates showing they'd been filled but never started. The cruelest detail was a handwritten note from Dr. Peterson stating that Kevin had called to cancel Mom's last 4 appointments, claiming she was doing fine and didn't need the stress of medical visits. The financial devastation was even worse than I had imagined during that overheard phone conversation. Bank statements scattered across Dad's desk told a story of systematic theft that had been going on for over 18 months, beginning just 2 months after Dad's funeral, when Mom was most vulnerable, and Kevin had stepped in as her helper. The savings account that had contained $127,000 from Dad's life insurance and their decades of careful saving now showed a balance of $23,000. The checking account was being drained through a combination of large withdrawals, automatic transfers to an account I didn't recognize, and cashier's checks made out to K. Martinez for amounts ranging from $2,000 to $8,000. The pattern was methodical and devastating. Kevin was taking just enough each month to fund his lifestyle and gambling debts without triggering automatic bank alerts, but not so much that Mom would immediately notice if she was lucid enough to check her balances. The most damning evidence was a series of text messages Kevin had accidentally left printed out, apparently from his ex-wife Amanda, demanding child support payments. "Get me my $30,200 or I'm taking you back to court." And Kevin's response, "Relax, I've got Mom's account set up for automatic transfer now. You'll get your money." My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold my phone steady as I photographed each document, trying to capture not just the evidence of Kevin's crimes, but the full scope of how he had isolated and exploited our mother. The power of attorney document I found was particularly devastating, dated 8 months ago, giving Kevin complete control over Mom's financial and medical decisions, signed at a time when her cognitive scores showed she was already significantly impaired. As a nurse, I knew that people with dementia could still sign legal documents, but the circumstances mattered enormously, and Kevin had clearly used Mom's confusion and trust to gain control over every aspect of her life. The signature on the document was shaky and uncertain, nothing like the confident script I remembered from thousands of birthday cards and school permission slips throughout my childhood. Even more damning was a note in Kevin's handwriting stapled to the back. Mom understands this is temporary to help with her confusion. Don't mention power of attorney to Carol or other family. Will cause unnecessary worry. He had been planning his cover-up from the very beginning, knowing that anyone who loved Mom would question his sudden control over her life. The sound of Kevin's BMW pulling into the driveway sent my heart rate through the roof and nearly made me drop the stack of documents I was photographing. I had been so focused on documenting his crimes that I'd lost track of time, and now I had maybe 30 seconds to return everything to its scattered arrangement before he walked in and discovered what I was doing. Mom's voice calling, "Kevin, is that you?" From the kitchen provided just enough distraction for me to shove the papers back approximately where I'd found them, though my hands were shaking so badly I couldn't be sure I'd gotten the placement exactly right. I managed to slip out of the office and into the hallway bathroom just as Kevin's key turned in the front door, my heart pounding so loudly I was sure he could hear it from across the house. Through the bathroom door, I could hear him greeting Mom with his usual charming warmth. "How's my favorite lady today? Did you remember to take your vitamins?" The casual way he mentioned vitamins when I knew she wasn't taking any of her prescribed medications revealed how completely he had taken over the narrative of her care while actually denying her the treatment she desperately needed. When I emerged from the bathroom, Kevin's eyes narrowed slightly as he took in my presence, and I could see him mentally calculating why I was visiting Mom during his usual time slot. "Carol, what a surprise," Kevin said, his voice carrying just enough edge to let me know my presence wasn't welcome. "I thought you'd be working. Isn't Tuesday usually one of your long shifts?" The fact that he knew my work schedule well enough to question my availability revealed how carefully he'd been monitoring my movements, probably to ensure I wouldn't accidentally discover what he was doing to Mom. "I switched shifts with a coworker," I lied smoothly, forcing my voice to remain casual despite the adrenaline still coursing through my system. "I wanted to spend some time with Mom, maybe take her to lunch." Kevin's expression shifted to barely concealed annoyance as he realized I was disrupting his routine access to Mom and potentially witnessing something that might raise questions about his version of events. Actually, Mom has a doctor's appointment this afternoon," he said, another lie delivered with practiced confidence. "Dr. Peterson wants to do some routine blood work, nothing serious. Maybe you could visit later in the week." But I was done accepting Kevin's control over my relationship with my mother, done allowing him to gatekeep access to the woman who had raised me. That's wonderful that she's seeing Dr. Peterson," I said, pulling out my phone. "I'd love to drive her to the appointment. What time should we leave?" The panic that flashed across Kevin's face before he regained his composure told me everything I needed to know. There was no appointment, just like there hadn't been any real appointments for months, and now he was trapped in a lie that I could easily verify with one phone call to the doctor's office. The confrontation with Kevin about the fictional doctor's appointment marked the beginning of the most intense 3 weeks of my life, as I balanced my nursing shifts with a covert investigation that would either save Mom or destroy our family entirely. Kevin's obvious panic when I offered to drive Mom to her non-existent appointment had confirmed my worst suspicions. But I knew that emotional certainty wasn't enough to build a legal case against someone who had spent 2 years carefully covering his tracks. I needed documentation, testimony, and most importantly, I needed to do this properly through official channels that would protect Mom from Kevin's retaliation while ensuring he faced real consequences for his crimes. The first step was reconnecting with Dr. Peterson, who had been Mom's physician for over 15 years and had watched her decline with growing frustration at the family's apparent refusal to follow medical recommendations. When I called her office and identified myself as Mom's daughter, Dr. Peterson's relief was palpable. "Carol, I've been hoping someone would reach out," she said during our phone conversation. "Your mother's condition requires immediate intervention, and I've been very concerned about the lack of family support for her treatment plan." I scheduled an appointment to meet with Dr. Peterson in person, knowing that her medical opinion would be crucial evidence in any elder abuse investigation. Dr. Peterson's office felt like a sanctuary of competence and caring after weeks of navigating Kevin's web of lies and manipulation. She was a woman in her early 60s with kind eyes and the direct manner of someone who had spent decades delivering difficult news with compassion and clarity. "Your mother's Alzheimer's diagnosis was confirmed 18 months ago," she began, pulling up Mom's chart on her computer screen. "We caught it relatively early, which means that with proper medication and support, we could significantly slow the progression and maintain her quality of life for years." But then Dr. Peterson's expression darkened as she scrolled through the appointment history. "However, someone, I believe it was your brother Kevin, has been canceling her appointments and declining to fill her prescriptions. When I've called to express concern, he's insisted that your mother is doing fine and doesn't want the stress of medical interventions." The doctor's frustration was evident as she showed me the documented attempts she'd made to maintain Mom's care. I've left multiple voicemails, sent letters to the house, even called Kevin directly to explain the importance of medication compliance. His response has been consistent, that the family has decided to pursue natural management of her condition. The medical neglect was even more systematic than I had realized, revealing Kevin's calculated decision to let Mom's condition deteriorate while he maintained access to her finances. My second crucial meeting was with Maria Santos at Adult Protective Services, a sharp-eyed investigator who had spent 15 years building cases against people who exploited vulnerable adults. Her office walls were covered with certificates and commendations, but also with photos of elderly clients she'd helped escape abuse. A reminder that behind every case file was a real person whose dignity and safety hung in the balance. "Your documentation is exceptional," Maria said as she reviewed the photographs I'd taken of Mom's financial and medical records. "Most family members don't have the medical knowledge to recognize the signs of systematic neglect, and they certainly don't know how to document evidence properly." She explained that elder abuse cases were notoriously difficult to prosecute because victims were often unable to testify effectively, and financial crimes could be disguised as legitimate family assistance. "But your brother made several crucial mistakes," Maria continued. "First, he gained power of attorney when your mother was already cognitively impaired, which raises questions about informed consent. Second, the pattern of withdrawals clearly benefits him rather than her care. And third, the medical neglect is documented by a licensed physician who can testify about the harm caused by denying treatment." Maria assured me that APS would open an immediate investigation, but she also warned me that Kevin would likely become suspicious once official inquiries began, potentially accelerating his theft or leading him to move Mom somewhere I couldn't monitor her condition. The most emotionally challenging part of building the case was spending time with Mom while pretending everything was normal, knowing that each visit might reveal further deterioration caused by Kevin's denial of medical care. I started visiting every Tuesday and Thursday afternoon, timing my appearances for when Kevin was usually at work, slowly rebuilding a relationship that his manipulation had damaged over the past 2 years. Mom's condition was worse than I had realized. She repeated the same questions every few minutes, couldn't remember conversations we'd had the day before, and sometimes forgot who I was entirely, calling me by her sister's name or asking if I was one of her home health aides. But there were still moments of clarity when she seemed like her old self, and during those precious windows, she would express confusion and fear about her finances that broke my heart. "I don't understand where all my money is going, Mija," she whispered during one particularly lucid moment. "Kevin says I'm spending too much, but I don't remember buying anything expensive. I'm scared I'm losing my mind." The vulnerability in her admission made me want to tell her everything, but Maria Santos had coached me to gather information without revealing the investigation, knowing that Mom's confusion might lead her to inadvertently warn Kevin if she understood what was happening. The breakthrough came during my 5th visit when I discovered Kevin's greatest mistake hidden in plain sight. While helping Mom organize her medicine cabinet, I found a manila envelope stuffed between towels that contained Kevin's complete financial records. Apparently, he'd been using Mom's house as storage for documents he didn't want his ex-wife's lawyers to find during their ongoing custody battle. The papers told a devastating story of financial ruin disguised as success. Kevin owed $47,000 in credit card debt, was 4 months behind on child support payments, and was borrowing against those insurance commissions to finance a gambling habit that cost him over $80,000. In the past 2 years, bank statements showed automatic withdrawals from Mom's account going directly to Kevin's personal accounts, casino cash advances charged to credit cards he couldn't afford to pay, and a second mortgage on his house that he'd apparently used to cover previous gambling debts. The most damning evidence was a handwritten note in Kevin's script that said, "Mom's account good for at least another $20K before anyone notices. After that, might need to sell the house." He had been planning the complete liquidation of Mom's assets while letting her health deteriorate to the point where she couldn't effectively oppose his decisions. I photographed every page with shaking hands, finally understanding that this wasn't just theft. It was a long-term plan to financially destroy our mother while using her cognitive decline as cover for his crimes. By the end of the second week, I had built what Maria Santos called the most comprehensive elder abuse case she'd seen in her career. But we still needed one crucial element: recorded evidence of Kevin admitting his crimes. The plan we developed was elegant in its simplicity. I would arrange a family meeting under the pretense of discussing Mom's care needs, but actually to get Kevin talking about his financial management of her affairs while wearing a wire provided by Detective James Rodriguez of the Phoenix Police Department's Economic Crimes Unit. "The key is to make him feel like the expert," Detective Rodriguez coached me during our preparation meeting. "Stroke his ego, ask for his advice about managing your own finances, get him comfortable talking about the methods he uses to help your mother." The recording device was so small it looked like a button on my cardigan, but it felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds as I practiced keeping my voice steady while discussing Kevin's systematic destruction of our mother's life. We scheduled the meeting for a Saturday afternoon at Mom's house, with Kevin believing we were going to discuss hiring additional home care while I actually planned to end his criminal enterprise forever. As I drove home from the final preparation meeting, I realized that the scared, rejected daughter who had paid for her own humiliation at Romano's was gone, replaced by someone far more dangerous, a woman who had stopped caring about family approval and started caring about family justice. The night before the confrontation, I called Kevin with shaking hands and the performance of my life ahead of me. "Kevin, I've been thinking about what happened at Mom's party, and I owe you an apology," I said, nearly choking on words that tasted like poison in my mouth. "You were absolutely right. I haven't been involved enough in Mom's care, and I want to change that. Could we have a family meeting to discuss how I can help more financially?" The silence on the other end stretched so long I wondered if Kevin had seen through my act, but finally his voice came back with cautious satisfaction. "I'm glad you're finally seeing reason, Carol. Mom does need more support, and frankly, the financial burden has been falling entirely on me." Perfect. He was already positioning himself as the martyred son bearing unfair responsibility, exactly the narrative that would make his recorded confession even more damaging. We arranged to meet at Mom's house the following Saturday at 2 p.m., ostensibly to discuss care plans and financial responsibilities, but actually for Kevin to walk into a trap that would end his freedom and potentially save Mom's life. As I hung up the phone, I felt a surge of satisfaction that had been building for 3 weeks. Kevin thought he was getting another opportunity to establish his superiority and my inadequacy, another chance to manipulate the family dynamics in his favor. Instead, he was about to discover that his disappointing sister had learned to fight back with weapons he'd never seen coming: evidence, documentation, and the kind of methodical preparation that turns victims into prosecutors and golden children into defendants. Saturday afternoon arrived with the kind of blazing Phoenix heat that makes everything shimmer and distort, which felt appropriate for a day when I planned to shatter the illusions Kevin had spent years constructing around his theft and abuse. I arrived at Mom's house an hour early, using the extra time to help her shower and dress while testing the recording equipment hidden beneath my blue cardigan. The same cardigan I'd worn to countless family gatherings where Kevin had made me feel small and unwanted. Mom seemed more confused than usual, asking me 3 times why Kevin was coming over and expressing anxiety about having done something wrong that was causing family tension. "Are we in trouble, sweetie?" she asked as I helped her into her favorite floral blouse, the one Dad had bought her for their last anniversary. Kevin seemed upset when he called yesterday about this meeting. Her fragility broke my heart, but also steeled my resolve. This vulnerable, frightened woman was the person Kevin had been systematically robbing and medically neglecting, the mother who had sacrificed everything to raise him and deserved protection, rather than exploitation in her final lucid years. When I saw Kevin's BMW pull into the driveway at exactly 2 p.m., my pulse quickened with anticipation rather than the usual dread, because for the first time in our relationship, I held all the cards and he had no idea that the game had changed completely. Kevin walked into Mom's house with the confident swagger of someone who believed he owned the space and everyone in it, his expensive suit perfectly tailored and his smile radiating the charm that had opened every door since childhood. "Carol, I have to say I'm impressed," he began, settling into Dad's old recliner with territorial authority. "It takes maturity to admit when you've been wrong about family responsibilities." The condescension in his voice was so familiar it no longer stung. Instead, it fueled my determination to record every arrogant word for the jury that would eventually decide his fate. Mom perched uncertainly on the couch, glancing between us like she wasn't quite sure why we were all there, but understanding that something important was happening that she couldn't quite grasp. "I want to start by acknowledging how much you've sacrificed for Mom since Dad passed away," I began, forcing admiration into my voice while the recording device captured every syllable. "I had no idea how much financial responsibility you'd taken on until recently." Kevin's chest puffed out with pride as he prepared to catalog his supposed sacrifices and my supposed shortcomings, completely unaware that he was about to provide prosecutors with a detailed confession to multiple felonies. "Well, Carol, caring for someone with Mom's condition is expensive and complicated," he said, already falling into the trap. "Someone had to step up and make the difficult decisions that she can't make for herself anymore." The next 20 minutes were like watching Kevin dig his own grave with growing enthusiasm, as I led him through a detailed explanation of his financial management of Mom's business. "The medical expenses alone have been overwhelming," he lied smoothly, citing fictitious costs for treatments that Dr. Peterson's records would prove never happened. "Last month, I had to cover $6,000 for emergency dental work, and the month before that, there was a $4,500 plumbing emergency that Mom was too confused to handle on her own." Each fabrication was delivered with practiced sincerity, and I could see him mentally calculating how much sympathy and admiration he could extract from the situation. But then I pushed harder, asking for specific details about Mom's medical care that forced him into increasingly elaborate lies. "It must be difficult managing her medications," I said innocently. "Which doctor prescribed her current treatment plan?" Kevin's momentary hesitation revealed his first crack of uncertainty. "Dr. Peterson handles all that," he said carefully. "Ours, I make sure Mom doesn't worry about the details since medical information just confuses her more." The casual dismissal of Mom's right to understand her own medical care was exactly the kind of admission that would infuriate a jury, especially when contrasted with Dr. Peterson's documented attempts to provide proper treatment that Kevin had systematically blocked. Mom sat quietly during most of Kevin's performance, occasionally nodding when he directed questions toward her, but I could see the growing confusion in her eyes as she tried to follow his increasingly complex explanations. Kevin handles everything now," she said when prompted, her voice carrying the defeated acceptance of someone who had been convinced she was too incompetent to manage her own life. "I don't understand the money things anymore. It's all too confusing for me." The way she repeated Kevin's exact phrasing revealed how thoroughly he had programmed her to accept his narrative of her incompetence. and the sadness in her voice made me want to end this charade immediately and comfort her. But I knew that the evidence we were gathering might be the only thing standing between Mom and complete financial ruin, so I pushed Kevin harder toward the admissions we desperately needed. "I've been worried about Dad's life insurance money," I said, improvising desperately as I felt the conversation teetering on the edge of Kevin becoming suspicious. "Wasn't it around $127,000? I want to make sure that money is being managed properly for Mom's long-term care." Kevin's face went pale as he realized I had specific knowledge of Mom's finances, and for the first time in the conversation, he seemed genuinely rattled rather than smugly confident. "That money? Well, most of it has been spent on Mom's care," Kevin said, his voice losing some of its practiced smoothness. "Like I said, the expenses have been enormous, and someone had to make the hard choices about prioritizing her immediate needs." I could see him calculating whether to stick with his story or pivot to a different strategy, unaware that every word was being recorded for use against him in court. Kevin, $127,000 in 18 months seems like an extraordinary amount for medical care," I pressed, channeling Maria Santos's coaching about getting specific admissions. "Are you sure you're not being overly generous with Mom's money?" The accusation hung in the air like smoke, and I watched Kevin make the fatal decision to justify his actions rather than deflect them. "Look, Carol, Mom's not getting any better. The doctor confirmed she has dementia and it's only going to get worse. I figured it was better to use her money for things that would make her comfortable now, rather than let it sit in the bank earning nothing." There it was, recorded admission that he knew about Mom's diagnosis and had made conscious decisions about her money based on that knowledge, exactly the evidence of willful exploitation that Detective Rodriguez had said would make the case unbeatable. But Kevin's ego wouldn't let him stop talking when silence might have saved him, the same character flaw that had made him the golden child but would now make him a convicted felon. "Besides, who do you think is going to inherit whatever's left when Mom dies anyway?" he continued, apparently believing that impending inheritance justified present theft. "It's not like the money is going to strangers. It's staying in the family. I'm just managing it more efficiently than she could." The casual way he discussed Mom's death while she sat right next to him, combined with his complete lack of awareness about what constituted criminal behavior, provided prosecutors with everything they would need to establish both motive and intent. I felt my carefully maintained facade beginning to crack as the full scope of Kevin's callousness became undeniable. "More efficiently," I repeated, letting real anger bleed into my voice for the first time. "Kevin, you've stolen over $100,000 from our mother while denying her proper medical care. You've let her Alzheimer's progress untreated while you drained her accounts to fund your gambling addiction and child support payments. That's not family financial management. That's elder abuse." The room fell completely silent, except for the soft ticking of Dad's old clock, and I watched Kevin's face cycle through confusion, anger, and finally dawning realization that something was very wrong with this conversation and with my sudden knowledge of his private financial disasters. The next few minutes unfolded like a carefully choreographed dance, as Kevin tried to process how his moment of triumph had suddenly become a catastrophe. "What the hell are you talking about, Carol?" he demanded, but his voice had lost all its confident authority. "I haven't stolen anything. Every penny I've spent has been for Mom's benefit." "You're crazy if you think—" That's when Maria Santos stepped out of the kitchen, her badge clearly visible, followed by Detective Rodriguez with handcuffs already in his hand and 2 uniformed officers blocking the exits in case Kevin tried to run. "Mr. Kevin Martinez, I'm Maria Santos with Adult Protective Services, and this is Detective Rodriguez with the Phoenix Police Department," she announced with professional calm. "You're under arrest for financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult, medical neglect, and elder abuse. You have the right to remain silent." Kevin's face went from pale to bright red as the reality crashed over him like a tsunami. "This is insane," he shouted, turning to me with pure venom in his eyes. "Carol, what have you done?" I'm the one who's been taking care of Mom while you've been playing nurse with strangers." But his protests fell on deaf ears as Detective Rodriguez professionally read him his rights, each Miranda warning falling like hammer blows on the fantasy Kevin had constructed around his systematic abuse of our mother. Mom sat on the couch looking bewildered by the sudden appearance of strangers in her living room, and I knelt beside her, taking her trembling hands in mine while trying to explain in simple terms that Kevin wouldn't be handling her money anymore and that I was going to take care of her from now on. The aftermath unfolded with the efficiency of a well-planned operation that had been weeks in the making. As Kevin was led away in handcuffs, still protesting his innocence and trying to convince the officers that I was the real threat to Mom's welfare, Detective Rodriguez and Maria Santos began the process of securing evidence and arranging emergency protective measures for Mom's remaining assets. "We've already frozen the accounts your brother had access to," Maria explained while I helped Mom process what was happening. "Most of the stolen money is still traceable and can be recovered, though it will take time to work through the legal system." The house filled with crime scene technicians photographing documents, social workers arranging immediate medical care for Mom, and family members who began arriving as news of Kevin's arrest spread through our extended network. Aunt Carmen arrived first, her face streaked with tears as she hugged Mom and kept repeating, "I'm so sorry. I should have known something was wrong." Uncle Roberto appeared an hour later, looking shocked and ashamed as he admitted, "Kevin always said you were causing problems. Carol, I should have listened to my gut instead of believing his stories." The same relatives who had watched me be humiliated at Mom's birthday party were now forced to confront the reality that the golden child they'd protected and enabled had been systematically destroying the woman they all claimed to love. By evening, as Mom sat surrounded by family members who were finally seeing her condition clearly and promising to help with her care, I realized that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to accept the unacceptable, even when it means tearing apart the fiction that your family has built around its own dysfunction. 6 months later, as I write this from Mom's living room where I now spend every weekend, Kevin is serving a 3-year sentence for elder abuse and financial exploitation, and Mom is on a medication regimen that has significantly slowed her cognitive decline. The 104 Laura Histole has been recovered and placed in a protected trust that ensures Mom scare further stuff her life, while Kevin's gambling addiction is being treated in prison with the kind of systematics intervention hidden yet or mother for years. The birthday party bill that started, Thyssen Tire investigation that 14-2173. 89 that felt like the end of the world was actually the beginning of something far more important. My understanding that family loyalty doesn't mean enabling abuse, and that sometimes the greatest act of love is having the courage to destroy the lies that are slowly killing someone you care about. Mom still has good days and bad days, moments of clarity and periods of confusion. But she's surrounded by people who are committed to her dignity and well-being rather than her exploitation. And Kevin? The golden child who spent 38 years believing he was untouchable learned the hard way that even family has limits, and that the sister he'd spent decades underestimating had become the instrument of his destruction. As I watch Mom work on her crossword puzzles with medication-enhanced focus, I'm reminded that justice isn't always pretty or satisfying in the way movies promise, but it's always necessary when the alternative is allowing evil to triumph through the silence of good people who should have known better. If this story touched your heart like it did mine, leave a comment below telling us what you thought. We love reading every message you write, and they often inspire us for future stories. Take advantage and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, because we bring you incredible stories every day. And look, there's another video coming up with a story that will leave you speechless. Click here and I'll see you in the next video. See you soon.